There is a moment that changes an empath forever, and almost no one notices it while it is happening. It does not begin with an argument. It does not begin with anger. It begins with silence. The kind of silence that comes after countless conversations, endless explanations, and years of trying to make other people understand what was never difficult to understand in the first place. Many believe this silence means the empath has become cold, distant, or no longer cares. The truth is far more powerful. It often marks the birth of emotional intelligence in its strongest form. For a long time, an empath believes that if they choose better words, stay calmer, explain one more time, or show even more patience, everything will finally make sense. They carry emotional responsibility that was never theirs to carry. They try to fix misunderstandings, soften conflicts, and protect relationships at the cost of their own peace. Yet one quiet realization changes everything. Some people are not waiting to understand you. They are waiting for you to keep explaining while they remain exactly the same. That realization does not create bitterness. It creates freedom. Psychology shows that emotionally intelligent people slowly learn the difference between healthy communication and emotional overwork. They stop confusing endless explanations with genuine connection. They recognize that respect cannot be forced, empathy cannot be demanded, and understanding cannot be pushed into someone who has already decided not to listen. This shift is rarely dramatic on the outside, but inside it feels like an entirely new life begins. Relationships change, conversations change, even the way people respond to the empath begins to change. The silence that once felt uncomfortable becomes a quiet source of confidence. Many people never notice this transformation until it has already happened, which is why it is so often misunderstood. In this video, we will uncover the hidden psychology behind the day an empath stops explaining, why emotional exhaustion builds so slowly that even the empath may not recognize it, how emotional intelligence quietly replaces the need for constant validation, why silence can become stronger than the perfect argument, and why this single change often reveals the true nature of every relationship. Along the way, you will also discover lesser-known psychological insights about boundaries, emotional energy, and the surprising reason that people often react differently once an empath chooses peace over persuasion. Stay with us until the very end because the final lesson may completely change the way you see silence, kindness, and emotional strength, and it may even help you recognize whether you have been explaining yourself to the wrong people all along. Welcome to Shadow Wisdom, where we explore the hidden patterns of the mind, emotional intelligence, and the deeper truths behind human behavior. If these topics speak to you, and you want more thoughtful insights that help you understand yourself and others, subscribe to the channel and join us as we begin this fascinating journey. An empath usually notices what other people miss. A small change in someone's voice, a forced smile, a pause before an answer, or a look that lasts only a second can reveal emotions that many people never even recognize. This ability can be beautiful because it allows empaths to comfort others, build trust, and create deep relationships. But it also creates a hidden burden. Once an empath notices another person's emotional state, they often feel responsible for it. They begin asking themselves questions that most people never ask. Did I say something wrong? Did I hurt them without realizing it? Are they upset because of me? Even when there is no clear evidence, the empath's mind starts searching for answers. This is where emotional responsibility quietly begins to grow. Instead of allowing other people to own their feelings, the empath slowly starts carrying them. It happens so naturally that they rarely notice it. They believe that if someone feels confused, they should explain more clearly. If someone feels offended, they should clarify their intentions. If someone misunderstands them, they should fix the misunderstanding before it grows. Their goal is rarely to win an argument. Their goal is to restore peace. They want everyone to feel safe, understood, and emotionally comfortable. Conflict feels heavy to them because they can sense the emotional tension in the room long before anyone says a word. While others may ignore awkward silence or unresolved disagreement, an empath often feels it like pressure inside their own body. Because of this, they become the first person to apologize, the first to explain, and the first to reach out after a disagreement. They believe that clarity can solve emotional pain. They believe honest communication can heal almost every misunderstanding. Sometimes this belief is true. Healthy relationships grow stronger through honest conversations. But the problem begins when the empath assumes that every emotional problem can be solved simply by explaining themselves better. This creates what psychologists often describe as emotional labor. Emotional labor is the invisible work of managing emotions, reducing tension, keeping conversations calm, and protecting relationships from falling apart. Many empaths perform this work every single day without realizing it. They monitor everyone's mood. They carefully choose every word. They soften their opinions so nobody feels attacked. They apologize even when they are not responsible. They think ahead, trying to prevent future misunderstandings before they even happen. While other people may leave difficult conversations behind, the empath keeps replaying every sentence, wondering if different words could have changed everything. This constant emotional effort is exhausting because it never truly ends. Every relationship becomes another place where they feel responsible for keeping emotional balance. Instead of asking whether someone else is communicating honestly, they ask whether they themselves explained well enough. Instead of expecting mutual understanding, they quietly accept the role of emotional translator. They become responsible for explaining both what they feel and what they never intended to make others feel. Over time, this creates an unhealthy habit. The empath becomes less concerned with being understood naturally, and more concerned with making understanding happen through endless effort. Hidden beneath all of this is one powerful belief that often remains invisible for years. If I explain myself well enough, they will finally understand. This belief feels hopeful because it suggests every relationship can be saved through better communication. Every misunderstanding seems temporary. Every conflict seems fixable. Every painful conversation feels like it only needs one more explanation. So the empath keeps trying. They explain their feelings again. They explain their intentions again. They explain why certain words hurt them. They explain why they need boundaries. They explain why they reacted the way they did. They explain what they meant instead of what was assumed. Each explanation carries hope that this time things will be different. Sometimes they are. Healthy people listen, ask questions, and genuinely try to understand. But not every relationship works this way. Some people are interested only in defending themselves. Others hear the words but ignore the meaning. Some have already decided what they believe before the conversation even begins. No amount of explanation changes a mind that is not open to understanding. Yet the empath often blames themselves instead of recognizing this reality. They think perhaps they were not clear enough. Perhaps they spoke at the wrong moment. Perhaps they chose the wrong words. Hope keeps them explaining long after the conversation has stopped moving forward. Slowly, hope begins turning into exhaustion. The cycle becomes almost impossible to notice because it develops one conversation at a time. A misunderstanding appears. The empath explains. Another misunderstanding follows. The empath explains again. Then they explain why they explained. Then they defend the explanation itself. Eventually, the original issue almost disappears because the entire conversation becomes about proving intentions instead of solving the problem. They repeat the same emotions in different words, hoping that one version will finally be accepted. They defend actions that were never meant to hurt anyone. They justify boundaries that should never require permission. They correct assumptions that keep returning no matter how often they are corrected. They even begin preparing explanations before conflict exists, trying to prevent future misunderstandings before anyone has accused them of anything. Their mind becomes filled with imaginary conversations, rehearsing responses to questions that may never even be asked. Emotional energy is spent on defending a character that should have already been visible through consistent actions. The empath starts living as if every feeling requires evidence and every boundary requires approval. There is a quiet truth that many people never learn until much later in life. Those who genuinely want to understand usually need very little explanation. They listen carefully, they ask sincere questions, they notice consistency between words and actions. They allow room for mistakes because they assume good intentions unless proven otherwise. Understanding grows naturally because both people are working toward the same goal. But someone who is committed to misunderstanding often requires endless explanations. Every answer creates another accusation. Every clarification creates another doubt. Every conversation circles back to the same place because the goal was never understanding. It was control, defensiveness, or the refusal to see another perspective. The empath often mistakes persistence for patience, believing that if they continue explaining, compassion will eventually reach the other person. Instead, they become trapped in conversations that consume enormous emotional energy while producing almost no emotional progress. This creates one of the greatest emotional paradoxes an empath can experience. The more they explain, the less heard they sometimes feel. At first, this sounds impossible. Communication should create more understanding, not less. Yet when explanations become endless, people stop hearing the meaning and start focusing only on defending their own position. The empath becomes trapped in proving instead of simply expressing. Their feelings begin requiring evidence instead of acceptance. Their intentions become more important than their emotional reality. They slowly lose confidence because they start measuring the value of their emotions by how successfully they can convince someone else. Instead of trusting what they feel, they begin asking whether their feelings are convincing enough. This is one of the hidden costs of constant explanation. It quietly disconnects people from their own inner certainty. This is where emotional intelligence begins changing everything. Many people believe emotional intelligence means becoming better at explaining emotions. In reality, one of its greatest lessons is learning where explanation has value and where it does not. Emotional intelligence is not about convincing every person you meet that your feelings are reasonable. It is recognizing which conversations are built on mutual respect and which conversations are built on endless resistance. Communication and persuasion are not the same thing. Communication shares truth openly and honestly without demanding agreement. Persuasion tries to change another person's conclusion. An empath often enters conversations hoping simply to communicate, but without noticing it, they slowly become trapped in persuasion. They keep searching for better words because they believe better words will finally unlock understanding. Emotional intelligence gently interrupts this habit. It asks a different question. Is this person trying to understand, or am I trying to force understanding where it no longer exists? The answer changes how emotionally mature people approach relationships. They stop believing every disagreement must end with complete agreement. They accept that two people can leave a conversation seeing life differently. They understand that respect does not require identical opinions. Most importantly, they stop treating every misunderstanding as a personal failure. Healthy emotional boundaries begin growing from this realization. A boundary is not an attempt to control someone else's behavior. It is a decision about how much emotional energy you are willing to invest. The empath slowly learns that explaining the same truth 20 times does not make it more true. Sometimes repeating it only drains the person speaking. Emotional intelligence gives permission to speak honestly once, clarify if necessary, and then allow another person's response to belong to them. This shift feels uncomfortable at first because it challenges years of emotional habits, yet it also creates a kind of freedom that many empaths have never experienced before. As this transformation continues, the need for constant validation slowly fades. The empath no longer measures success by whether everyone agrees with them. They no longer judge every conversation by whether misunderstandings completely disappear. Instead, they begin protecting something much more valuable than approval. They begin protecting their peace. Peace becomes more important than winning every emotional debate. They stop volunteering endless explanations where genuine listening is absent. They stop chasing people who only value them while they are solving emotional problems. They stop carrying conversations that require only one person to do all the emotional work. This change often surprises those around them because the empath is still kind, still compassionate, and still willing to communicate honestly. The difference is that they no longer sacrifice themselves to make everyone else comfortable. Their kindness finally includes themselves. That is why silence begins taking on an entirely different meaning. Before emotional growth, silence often feels frightening because it seems like giving up. After emotional growth, silence becomes a conscious choice. It becomes self-respect instead of surrender. It becomes emotional regulation instead of emotional reaction. Rather than responding immediately to every misunderstanding, the empath learns to pause. Rather than defending every accusation, they allow their consistent behavior to speak louder than repeated explanations. Silence creates space where emotions can settle instead of escalating. It protects energy that would otherwise disappear into conversations with no real destination. It is not about refusing to communicate. It is about refusing to waste communication where it is no longer received with honesty. This kind of silence often unsettles people who became accustomed to unlimited emotional access. They expected immediate reassurance, endless clarification, and constant emotional availability. When those explanations stop, they sometimes become confused or frustrated because the familiar pattern has disappeared. What changed was not the empath's capacity for love. What changed was their willingness to carry responsibilities that never truly belonged to them in the first place. Their silence is not punishment, revenge, or emotional withdrawal. It is the careful conservation of emotional energy saved for relationships where understanding grows through mutual respect instead of endless explanation. Silence can become one of the greatest signs of emotional intelligence, but only when it comes from the right place. This is an important distinction because not every quiet person is emotionally healthy, and not every person who speaks often lacks wisdom. The meaning of silence depends on what is happening beneath it. Two people may both choose not to respond, yet their reasons can be completely different. One person remains silent because they have found peace. The other remains silent because they are afraid. From the outside, these two forms of silence can look almost identical. Inside, however, they are worlds apart. An empath who is growing emotionally must learn to recognize this difference, because confusing healthy silence with emotional avoidance can create new problems instead of solving old ones. Emotional intelligence is not about speaking less. It is about knowing when words create connection and when words only create more confusion. Sometimes the strongest response is a calm conversation. Other times the strongest response is allowing silence to do the work that endless explanations never could. Healthy silence has a steady quality to it. It is calm instead of tense. It is intentional instead of impulsive. It is peaceful instead of emotionally charged. It does not exist to punish another person or make them feel guilty. It exists because the empath has realized that protecting inner peace is just as important as expressing every feeling. This silence does not rush to defend itself. It does not panic when someone misunderstands it. It does not constantly search for the perfect sentence that will finally change another person's mind. Instead, it remains grounded in truth. A grounded person understands that their worth does not disappear simply because someone refuses to recognize it. They understand that not every accusation deserves an answer, and not every opinion deserves a debate. This kind of silence is surprisingly active even though no words are being spoken. It is making decisions. It is setting boundaries. It is choosing emotional stability over emotional chaos. It is creating space where reactions once controlled every conversation. Healthy silence is not empty. It is filled with self-respect. Many empaths struggle with this at first because they spent years believing that good people always explain themselves. They believed silence meant failure or emotional distance. They worried that choosing not to explain would make them selfish or uncaring. But emotional intelligence slowly teaches another lesson. There are moments when speaking more is no longer an act of kindness. It becomes an act of self-neglect. Every extra explanation given to someone who has already decided not to understand slowly drains emotional energy that could have been used to build healthier relationships. Choosing silence in those moments is not abandoning communication. It is recognizing that communication only works when both people are willing to participate honestly. One person cannot create understanding alone, no matter how patient, kind, or emotionally aware they are. Unhealthy silence is very different. It may look peaceful, but beneath it lives fear rather than wisdom. Some people stop speaking because they want to punish someone emotionally. Instead of expressing disappointment honestly, they use silence to create anxiety in the other person. This is passive aggression. The goal is not peace. The goal is emotional control. Silence becomes a weapon instead of a boundary. Other people become silent because they completely withdraw from emotional connection. They shut down during every difficult conversation. They disappear whenever vulnerability is required. They avoid uncomfortable emotions instead of learning how to face them. This kind of silence protects fear rather than healing it. It may create temporary comfort, but it also prevents genuine intimacy from growing. There are also people who remain silent because they fear rejection so deeply that speaking honestly feels dangerous. Rather than risk being misunderstood, they stop expressing themselves completely. They convince themselves that staying quiet is safer than being vulnerable. While this silence may reduce immediate conflict, it slowly creates loneliness because important emotions remain hidden. This is why emotional intelligence always asks a deeper question. Why am I choosing silence right now? Is this silence helping me remain calm, or is it helping me avoid reality? Am I protecting my peace, or am I protecting my fear? Honest answers to these questions reveal everything. If silence creates greater clarity, emotional balance, and healthier boundaries, it is likely coming from strength. If silence creates confusion, resentment, emotional distance, and unresolved pain, it is probably coming from avoidance. Emotional intelligence never judges silence by its appearance alone. It judges silence by its purpose and its long-term effect. Healthy silence eventually supports honest communication when the right moment arrives. Unhealthy silence delays communication because it fears what honesty might reveal. As an empath begins understanding this difference, another transformation quietly unfolds. The endless habit of explaining begins to disappear, and something unexpected happens. Relationships begin revealing their true nature. Before this change, many relationships survived because the empath constantly repaired every misunderstanding. They filled every silence with explanations. They carried emotional conversations that required two people while doing almost all the work themselves. This made many relationships appear healthier than they actually were. Once the empath stops carrying all that emotional weight, reality becomes impossible to ignore. The people around them begin responding in ways that expose their true intentions. Some become curious. They notice the change and sincerely ask what is happening. Instead of becoming defensive, they become more attentive. They listen carefully because they realize the empath is no longer speaking from endless emotional urgency. They respect the new boundaries because they value the relationship more than their own comfort. They begin contributing emotionally instead of expecting the empath to do everything alone. These relationships often become stronger because responsibility becomes shared rather than one-sided. Other relationships move in a very different direction. Some people become frustrated almost immediately. They were comfortable when the empath constantly explained every feeling because it gave them emotional control over every conversation. When the explanations stop, they feel uncomfortable. They push harder for reactions. They question the empath's motives. They accuse them of becoming cold, distant, arrogant, or different. Sometimes they even claim the empath has changed completely. These reactions often surprise the empath because they expected their new boundaries to create more respect. Instead, they discover that not everyone benefited from their emotional growth. Some people only benefited from their emotional availability. When that unlimited access disappears, frustration replaces comfort. This is one of the most revealing moments in an empath's life. They begin noticing who truly cared about them and who mainly cared about what they received from them. The people who valued mutual respect usually adapt with patience. The people who depended on endless emotional labor often resist every new boundary. This difference can be painful because it forces the empath to see relationships more honestly than ever before, yet it is also deeply freeing. For years, they believed every difficult relationship simply needed better communication. Now they recognize that some relationships required shared responsibility, and without it, no amount of explanation could ever create lasting peace. What is important to understand is that nothing actually changed overnight. The empath did not suddenly lose kindness. They did not suddenly become emotionally unavailable. Their personality remained largely the same. The real change happened quietly over months or even years. They simply stopped carrying emotional responsibilities that never truly belonged to them. They stopped translating every feeling into endless explanations. They stopped fixing misunderstandings that other people refused to fix themselves. They stopped assuming that every emotional imbalance was their responsibility. From the outside, this can appear like a dramatic transformation because the pattern has finally ended. In reality, it is the beginning of emotional balance rather than emotional distance. As this balance grows, another quiet change begins inside the empath. The questions they ask themselves slowly become different. For many years, their thoughts revolved around one concern. Do they understand me? Every conversation, every disagreement, and every misunderstanding brought them back to that same question. They searched for approval through clarity. They believed being understood would finally bring peace. But emotional maturity introduces a far more important question. Do I understand myself? This simple shift changes everything because attention moves inward instead of constantly reaching outward. The empath becomes less interested in controlling another person's opinion and more interested in staying connected to their own values. They no longer lose themselves while trying to be accepted. They begin trusting their own emotional experience without waiting for someone else to confirm it first. This is where self-validation quietly replaces constant justification. Self-validation does not mean believing you are always right. It means accepting that your emotions are real even when another person disagrees with them. It means allowing yourself to experience disappointment without demanding that everyone approve of your reaction. It means recognizing that your boundaries deserve respect because they protect your well-being, not because every person agrees with them. Emotionally mature people understand that outside approval is helpful, but not essential. They appreciate understanding when it exists, but they no longer depend on it to feel emotionally secure. This creates a confidence that feels very different from arrogance. Arrogance constantly seeks to prove superiority. Genuine confidence rarely needs to prove anything at all. People often expect confident individuals to speak loudly, defend themselves quickly, and always have the perfect argument ready. Real confidence often looks much quieter. It listens carefully before responding. It accepts that not every criticism deserves attention. It knows that explaining the same truth repeatedly does not increase its value. Instead of chasing every misunderstanding, it allows consistent behavior to become its strongest message. Day after day, actions quietly communicate what endless words never could. Trust grows because people observe character instead of listening to repeated promises. Respect develops because boundaries remain steady instead of changing to satisfy every opinion. This is the quiet power that emotional intelligence eventually uncovers. It is not the power to control conversations. It is not the power to always be understood. It is the power to remain emotionally steady regardless of whether understanding arrives immediately or not. It is the freedom to choose peace without feeling guilty. It is the courage to let actions speak where explanations once carried all the weight. Real confidence rarely argues for its own value because it no longer depends on winning every emotional battle. It simply continues living in a way that reflects honesty, consistency, compassion, and self-respect, allowing time to reveal what endless explanations never could. As we reach the end of this journey, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. An empath does not stop explaining because they stop caring. They stop explaining because they finally understand that not every heart is open to understanding, no matter how carefully the truth is spoken. For years, they may have believed that every misunderstanding was their responsibility to fix, every conflict was theirs to calm, and every relationship could be saved with enough patience and enough words. But emotional intelligence gently reveals a different reality. Some conversations heal because both people are willing to listen. Others continue forever because only one person is doing the emotional work. That is why endless explaining becomes so exhausting. It slowly drains confidence, peace, and emotional energy. It teaches people to seek permission for feelings that never needed permission in the first place. Yet the moment an empath begins valuing their own inner peace as much as everyone else's comfort, everything starts to change. Communication becomes healthier because it is no longer driven by fear. Boundaries become clearer because they no longer need endless justification. Silence becomes meaningful because it is chosen with awareness rather than created by pain. Many people misunderstand this transformation. They see fewer explanations and assume there is less love. They hear fewer words and assume there is less compassion. They mistake calmness for distance and boundaries for rejection. But true emotional maturity often looks much quieter than people expect. It is not loud. It does not argue endlessly. It does not chase validation or demand that everyone agrees. It simply stands on truth with quiet confidence. Perhaps the greatest lesson is this. Kindness does not mean abandoning yourself to make everyone else comfortable. Compassion does not mean carrying emotional responsibilities that belong to someone else. And love does not require you to constantly prove your intentions to people who have already decided not to see them. Real strength is knowing when to speak with honesty and when to let silence protect the peace you worked so hard to build. So, before you leave, take a moment to reflect on one final question. What if the strongest thing an empath ever says is not spoken at all? What if the explanation they choose not to give becomes the moment they finally choose themselves? If this video gave you a new perspective on emotional intelligence, empathy, and the quiet strength of healthy boundaries, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your experience. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, share it with someone who may need to hear this message today, and subscribe to Shadow Wisdom for more deep insights into psychology, human behavior, and emotional growth. Thank you for watching, and until our next journey together, take care of your mind, protect your peace, and never forget that your value is not measured by how well you can explain yourself, but by how honestly you choose to live.